See applied behavior analysis in a different and refreshing light here at the Skinner Report. Hosted by Sara Litvak and Anna Bullard, they shed light on what ABA therapy organizations need to know to level up their behavioral health services, helping every individual with autism meet their maximum potential. Join information-filled episodes with leading industry experts as they discuss every issue and update in the ABA scene, giving you an idea of what you can do to become a quality ABA organization and support the building of inclusive and comfortable workplaces in this side of the healthcare world. Here are your hosts, Sara and Anna.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 4 of the Skinner Report.
So many updates, so much going on. I'll start by saying, so we just wrapped the Autism Investor Summit, which was so much fun. I know, Anna, you were there. We had a lot of the BHCOE team there, but curious if you have any takeaways from that event.
It was an amazing event. So, Sara, that was my first time attending in person. My first conference at AIS, or my first attendance at AIS, was when it was, virtual because of COVID. First of all, amazing job choosing the venue. It was absolutely wonderful. The weather was perfect. That's all I kept hearing. People were like, the weather is perfect. But I think there were some really important takeaways that really helped everyone understand how to begin to address the staffing issue. And I think that may be my biggest takeaway, that I really felt like everyone was hugely important, and where we are. Even on the payer side, you heard payers talking and, really saying, how are you guys going to figure this out? And I think there was a lot of good information and a lot of good data to help everyone do that.
Yeah. And for those of you who have never been, it's our 4th year doing this conference, and usually the day before the Investor Summit, we do a payer summit, which is a invitation only payer meeting. That's just a really great conversation for payers to kind of talk and collaborate in a safe space. And so we did that. This is our 2nd year doing that. And that was really great to see some of those conversations. And, it's funny, the Investor Summit, I think people get nervous with the word investment because I think, people feel multiple ways about investment coming into the industry. But when we think about investment, I think of it as a kind of, how are you investing in your business? How are you investing in growth? How are you investing in innovation? And it was fun. A lot of people came up to me and were like, I thought this was all about money. And I'd like, this really is like the Autism Innovation Summit or the Autism Impact Summit. So that was kind of cool to hear too, is, yes, there's a focus on the financial aspect of the industry and kind of the market dynamics, which I think we don't really talk about in some of the clinical conferences. And it's really focused on kind of the C-level or executive leadership, board members, investor side of the community, just to look at the trends in the market. But it was cool to see just such a diverse group of people. And I would have to say my favorite talk, I'm curious what yours is, Anna. My favorite talk, I had 2. First one, Jim Hogan, who works for Google. He is an autistic individual who just shared his story about how he found his way in corporate America. Was amazing and just so insightful. And then Dexter Braff, who's head of the Braff Group, just gives this like an incredible market dynamic analysis of transactions going on in the space and patterns and multiples and valuations. And that was super fascinating just because I haven't seen that data really shared anywhere. So I'll include a link if you guys are interested. You can view all of those presentations on the AIS Learning Management System. They're pre-recorded. But Anna, what was your favorite talk?
I will say that I thought the payer panel was fascinating. And I say that because I don't know that I've ever seen a panel where 3 payers were really having a conversation about improving quality and access to quality services. So that the panel was about, Sara led the panel, and it was about, really innovating on value-based pay. And it was so interesting. I think everyone in the room was kind of watching the uniqueness of it unfold with, so Aetna, there was a representative from Aetna, from Optum, and from Magellan there, and their views on it, and how they were looking at approaching value-based pay to really improve quality and patient outcomes and access to their members was really just fascinating to me, because you would expect maybe, I don't know if I expected more alignment, but they all had very individual, unique ways that they looked at that. And Sara, I'm interested, you moderated that panel, and what were your thoughts about it?
Oh, that was such a tough panel to moderate, because I think there's just so many unknowns across, value-based care. Like, where are we going with it? And it's probably a nice segue to talk about some of the recent value-based care partnerships we've announced, but it was really tough because we hadn't really announced all of those partnerships. So I had to kind of moderate it in a way that wasn't really speaking to those relationships that we know we had been working on. But also, all three of them had such unique perspectives about whether there's even a world for alternative payments in ABA, and just had all very different sensibilities. But like they're the three representatives of the 5 largest insurance carriers in the United States. So it was a great conversation. But yeah, it was tough. And I think it's hard to have a conversation around a topic where there's just so many unknowns and so many differing opinions.
Yeah, I thought you did great on that, though. Really just bringing out, I feel like, key factors in everyone was very, I think, interested in that payer perspective. I just wanted to give a huge shout out to David Cox, who is one of our own, but I thought his presentation was really insightful. I think it also worked very nicely just in answering a lot of the questions that everyone had around turnover, and kind of addressing that and understanding what are the real reasons. And it, maybe not to many people's surprise, it's not all about money. And so, yeah, I think everyone was pretty blown away. Lots of cameras, lots of phones up, taking pictures.
Yeah, you have a good presentation when like half the audience has their phone up taking photos of yourself.
That's right. And that happened with the BRAF group presentation as well, as you said.
Yeah. Yeah. And, other highlights, Sarah Trotman from the DeFi community did a great presentation, and actually wasn't able to listen to it live, but I went on and listened to the recording the other day, and she was just so funny and, had so many great things to say. And, your panel, Anna, was great on kind of market growth and expansion strategies. Love that. And we also did a Q&A with Darren Sush from Cigna about our partnership that we had announced. And that was a fun thing to share with the community at that point. So lots of good, exciting stuff. I really enjoyed it. It was so nice to be back in person. And if you've never been, I hope you join us next year. It's always great to welcome people, but it was also cool to see, like, when I asked how many of you were at the first Autism Investor Summit, like half the people raised their hands. So it's kind of cool that so many had stuck with us over the last 4 years.
Yeah. It was, I will say, I know we've got so many topics, and so we'll move on, but I will say, Sara, kudos to you, because I feel like, we actually were talking about this at work today, but there are a lot of conferences. And so for me, I think it was so awesome that I really walked away feeling like, oh, that's a lot of information I have not heard. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's really valuable for us to bring something that, that the field can feel like, I'm not hearing the same thing over and over, but it's like really a different take, as you described. So I think it's awesome. I'm super excited for next year.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I know we do have a very conference heavy industry. And I think we were joking, like every like city or sub-city or state has their own like ABA chapter, and they all do a conference, and it feels like you have to be at every single one of them. And it's tough to figure out how to prioritize. So there's definitely a couple that I always keep on my radar. Today I'm going to talk about Pepperdine, but before we talk about that, I wanted to just share a couple just industry updates that I thought might be meaningful. If you haven't heard about these, I think the first one I was going to share, Anna, I don't know, did you see this press release that came out from Central Reach? I think it was just in the last couple of days. Have you seen this?
You mentioned that to me, but I did not see the press release yet.
So they released a press release that essentially said that there was a new brand around Central Reach, and there was just some new initiatives. And so I'll kind of summarize both of them, but I thought this was really interesting. So the first was that they kind of unveiled a new look and feel to more closely align with their mission and their commitment to autism and IDD. And then some of the customers who are working with that community. And the rebrand went live on May 11th, and it should appear in all of their products in the coming weeks. And that didn't change any functionality or solutions, but just kind of gave a better representation of what they do. And then the second thing that they did was they kind of put a stake in the ground to say that it's time for a new software category that supports the lifelong care journey of individuals diagnosed with autism and related intellectual disabilities, so like ASD and IDD. And they basically just found that based on the trends they've seen, ABA and ABA kind of similar services are being delivered across the entire lifespan, and that there's really not like a specific like technology, I guess a category for these providers. And so basically as they've kind of put their stake in the ground as the leader of ABA in the software market and essentially trying to carve out this market as being something that they're really specializing in. So I thought that was a really interesting update.
Yeah, that sounds very exciting. And I'm always interested in, the life cycle, the patient journey, the patient mapping. We have conversations about that. But it sounds really exciting. I mean, we love innovation at BHCOE. So that sounds like going to be a really great opportunity for providers to engage on multiple levels.
Yeah, I agree. Other news, we recently announced 2 initiatives at BHCOE that I'm personally very excited about. The first is with Cigna or Evernorth, and we are working with them to really define and measure quality of care standards or health outcomes for autism treatment. And that's something that really is kind of the first of its kind that I'm aware of, in which we'll be working, as kind of a partner of Evernorth to establish foundational measures for ABA treatment that can really be done at a national level, and can help organizations, providers, patients identify overall quality of care delivered. And then we recently announced on May 10th a similar partnership with Centene. And Centene, if you're not familiar, is one of the, again, big 5 insurance carriers. And they recently purchased Magellan. And the partnership similarly will work with Centene to develop these foundational measures for quality care. And so those are some two initiatives that we're so excited about, not only developing those measures, but also just launching the value-based care program itself. And both of those partnerships, accreditation is something that will be required to participate in the value-based care program as just a base factor of, have you been ever sanctioned by Medicaid? Have you been, accused of a healthcare related crime, right? So those are some things we're checking on the accreditation side. And so those will be requirements to participate in a broader value-based care program with both of those entities. So very excited about, we will likely do a whole separate episode on this topic alone because it's a very dense and exciting topic, but I just wanted to share that because it's a significant BHCOE update.
Yeah, it's huge, Sarah. I mean, I'm super excited because I think that it's really an opportunity to bring everyone to the table and collaborate. So, I think that's one of the most meaningful pieces. This is not BHCOE or a payer really, saying, hey, we have all this figured out. It's, hey, let's figure this out. And so I'm thrilled that, we get to partner with these organizations and really make something real and meaningful happen for everyone. I know providers, we've gotten a lot of great feedback about participating. And so, yeah, you can go on our website and fill out a form to Sarah, I guess that's, we've had a lot of providers
to participate in the work group. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So for both of those, thank you for mentioning that. For both of those projects, we will have a Centene and a Cigna specific work group. And so if you're interested in being part of that conversation, we would encourage you to apply for the work group as a provider, or if you're a parent, we'll have both 2 work groups that will represent both of those stakeholder groups. And, we'll be very transparent through the entire process as we work through it. We are going to have a public comment on the measures. So a lot of what we're going to be doing is going to be communicated front and center to many of you listening, and very excited about it. I think our next update, Anna, is what we're here to talk about, which is a recent announcement we made with Pepperdine. And I know we recorded a really nice conversation with Ellie Kazemi and Lusineh Gharapetian. And so I'm excited to share this with all of you. Anna, anything to add on the Pepperdine piece before we dive in?
Yeah, Sarah, I think I would love for you to just do a quick overview of, for all of our listeners who may not know what Pepperdine is, or who may not know what our accreditation for a training site is going to look like, because I think that the big picture to me of what this episode is really leaning into is about ensuring that clinicians are being trained at places that have standards. And, now we're going to have an accreditation for that. So if you're a new BCBA coming into the field, there are ways that you can ensure where you're getting your training, that there's standards that they're being held to. Now, Sarah, I know I sometimes don't say all the right things because I'm not involved in all of that accreditation process and how it's laid out. So standards may not be the right word, but I'm really excited because, going back really quick to turnover, training was one of the top 3.
Yeah.
And I think this is going to be really valuable in addressing some of the reasons that we see a lot of staff turnover. But yes, very excited. So I think it might be helpful, because a lot of our listeners may not even have context around the university training site collaboration.
Yeah, happy to give a quick overview before we dive in. So I'll just start by saying Pepperdine University is one of the one of the universities on the national level that trains and pumps out qualified individuals to sit for their BCBA exam. And they're here local to Los Angeles, but also have an online program. And they also work with an organization called 2U. It's a publicly traded company that essentially does online program management partnerships. So they help place students with, training sites for not just ABA, but all types of programs that require experiential learning, right? Like psychology and social work and things like that. So our original conversation started with 2U and Pepperdine to really identify how we could help 2U in placing their students with qualified sites. And so what we found was, at BHCOE, our mission is really around quality. And what we found was that no matter how much important work we were doing, trying to increase quality at the organization level, if universities aren't ensuring that their students are getting proper training and oversight at the academic level, then you're still dealing with a job market that comes into an organization quite green without the right training or experience. And the organization tends to take on the burden of training those people, even though they should have ideally gotten that training during graduate school. And so what we were able to do was come up with a partnership, first and foremost, in which we were trying to drive students to enter the job market and, essentially earn their BCBA. And so Pepperdine is offering a 10% tuition discount to any RBT or technician. Anyone who works for an BHCOE accredited organization can earn a 10% discount on their tuition if they choose to apply for the program. So that's the first thing that's exciting. And then the second piece is that Pepperdine is moving forward with requiring that all of their students obtain their supervised field work through a BHCOE accredited training site. And so for those of you who aren't familiar, you have to accrue a certain number of hours as you get your coursework before you can sit for your BCBA exam. And so oftentimes this happens during the 2 years you're in your master's program. Sometimes it happens afterwards. But for Pepperdine, they will be requiring that organizations who currently supervise their students either seek accreditation or they will no longer be able to supervise their students. There's obviously some exception policies that are in place. Let's say, for example, the student already works at the organization. They've been with them for a certain number of time. It wouldn't make sense for that student to have to switch organizations. And so there would be a separate vetting process for that organization. Another exception is that, if they're in the middle of some type of audit or some type of natural disaster, then that would be a time limited exception. So there's some exceptions for those organizations to make sure we don't cause any undue burden or anything like that. But yeah, that's kind of the basis of the partnership. And I don't want to give too much away because we're about to talk about all of this with Ellie and Lusineh, but yeah, does that make that all sound good?
That sounds amazing. I think it's super exciting. And yeah, let's dive in.
Hey everyone, I am so excited. We have two great people with us today to talk a little bit about whether universities are doing their part in improving quality across applied behavior analysis. We have Dr. Ellie Kazemi. Hey, Ellie.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining. And we have Dr. Lusineh Gharapetian.
Hi, everyone.
So I know both of you very well, but I don't know how many of our listeners do. So Ellie, do you want to just do a quick intro? Who are you and what are you doing here? And Lucy, you're next.
Sure, I would love to. Who am I is a question I'm not sure I can take on during one podcast at all. But relevant to this podcast, I am currently the Chief Science Officer at Behavioral Health Center of Excellence. I get the pleasure of being able to interpret our science and talk to the public about all the good work we're doing here. And I'm super excited because the training site is very close and near to my heart, because as a full-time faculty member at Cal State Northridge, I started the program in behavior analysis, and we launched an entire practica coursework as well as handbook. And I've done a lot of work in supervision, and this is an area that I'm super, super excited about being able to help. So that's me.
And Lucy, I am so happy to have you here. And I don't really want to date us, but we met a very long time ago, and you'll have to fill in the gaps here. But if I recall, I interviewed you for your first technician position when you were entering the field. And that is the most random thing that I think has happened.
Yep, that pretty much takes us back to the very beginning when I was looking for behavior technician positions. As a brand new person in the field, I had started my master's program without having any experience or even knowing about what ABA was. And then halfway through, I was like, well, I got to get some practical experience. And you were the agency, or where we were was the agency that I applied to. So yeah, that takes us all the way back.
Super cool. What a small world, ladies.
Right.
Wow, I never knew that.
That's like the ABA geography that everyone can do, right? Is like, how do you know everyone?
And I always am interested, so I'm going to take you back just a little bit further. I'm always interested in how someone got into the autism field. Everyone's story is so unique. So I would love to just hear a quick version of that about how you kind of got into ABA.
I guess I'll start with that one. I fell into it not knowing that that was the career path that I was going to take. I was working in a research lab doing neuroimaging work at UCSD, where I did my undergrad, and I was applying to grad schools to go to PhD programs. And I happened to come across this master's program in ABA. I was like, oh, science-based, I like it. Data-driven, I like it. I think I'm going to give this a shot to make myself a better PhD candidate. I basically entered the program not knowing anything about anything. I fell in love with it within a year, and it was like I drank the Kool-Aid. It changed my outlook on life. And I discovered autism treatment through falling into the field of ABA, right?
Nice.
Now, I had previously been very passionate about ABA, and all the work I'd done in my undergrad was like, yes, like this is how we diagnose autism, but like there's a lack of treatments other than behavioral treatment for autism. So it was always like this kind of disheartening thing in my undergrad of, like, what are the options for someone who ends up being diagnosed with autism? And I was very young and naive back in the day, right? So obviously my outlook on this topic is very different now than it was 20, I don't know, some long time ago.
I love that. That's fantastic. Thank you.
I love it. I was just thinking on the last couple episodes of the podcast, we've talked so much about like the job market or running an ABA organization or, some of the stuff that's happening within ABA, but we haven't really talked about the university's role in the ABA landscape. So I'm really excited to have both you, Ellie, and Lucy here because you guys both have this really rich history in what the training and university programs have really looked like for applied behavior analysis. But before we do that, Lucy, just tell us, like, so what's your role at Pepperdine University? Like, how did you get there? Give us a little bit of understanding as to kind of what your day-to-day is at the organization, so people kind of know that context.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am an assistant professor and the MSABA Associate Program Director at Pepperdine for our behavior analysis program. I've been there for several years now, and I guess beyond that, I started working in the field clinically. I transitioned from clinical work to doing some organizational behavior management type work. And then from that, I transitioned into teaching. I was an adjunct for several years across several universities. And then I became full-time at Pepperdine with this position. So I have that experience of, starting out from being the person who's creating the behavior change on the level of an individual to transitioning to training individuals who are going to be providing that behavior change. So to moving towards that like higher level model of what do I need to teach these folks who are going to go out there and do the day-to-day work. So yeah.
And Ellie, I know I've heard stories, over the last couple of years, but you actually started the program at Cal State University, Northridge. And that was 10 years ago at this point, when there was no program at all for applied behavior analysis in Los Angeles.
Yes, I think we agreed we're not going to age ourselves today, but
there has been a lot of age talk.
Yeah, it was actually closer to 15 years ago. It was the first thing they asked me to do. It was the position at Cal State Northridge. And what they were looking for at the time was someone who would join their clinical psychology team and help the students who were completing their clinical psych degrees get the BCBA coursework so that they could become certificates. At the time, they were really just looking for finding a way for those individuals to be able to practice, because otherwise they would have had to go on to doctoral programs. And then that allowed me an avenue to begin the coursework and to eventually separate our program from them. So we went ahead and separated in 2008, and we established the first master's program in applied behavior analysis program in CSU. Yeah, and CSU Northridge, at least. Cal State Los Angeles had the concurrent program with special education, which we learned a lot from too.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, for those who are not in California, California has had a pretty rich history with funding applied behavior analysis for a long time. There's a regional center system here in California, so there's been a robust amount of funding available for ABA before most states ever had a mandate. So ABA was really necessary, 12, 15 years ago, or training for ABA, just because of how much funding was available for that. So it's been a great service to at least the state of California. So I'm just curious, everything at BHCOE that we do, it revolves around quality. And I feel like sometimes we forget about the universities and kind of the role that they play, the big picture role that they play in quality, in producing board certified behavior analysts. I guess I just want to pose the question to both of you is, what role do you think that the universities have in the quality of our field? And I think the loaded question is, how do you think it's been going?
Yeah, I love that question. Well, I think that universities' roles are to establish a couple of different things, right? On the very basic level, it's to establish what are the concepts and principles of behavior, what is the science of behavior, and how do we go about studying it, right? And then more deeply, and hopefully later on in someone's curriculum, they understand what the foundations are for the philosophy that guides the practice and science of behavior analysis. So if a person can understand that philosophical orientation and has a solid understanding of the behavioral principles, hopefully they will develop the critical thinking skills to think like scientists and to be able to solve problems when they're working clinically. And I really think that this is the role that universities should take on, is to give this scientific orientation and to teach this philosophical position. Now, ultimately, what we end up doing in graduate programs is maybe some of this. Hopefully what happens at different programs, I don't know, but this is what we're aiming for. And ultimately, we're giving a lot of information to students that we hope they take out and use appropriately and effectively in the field. And we hope that they apply these these strategies and things that we teach them in ethical and high quality ways, right? But of course, we can't control for that because that's a realm that we have very little control and oversight over.
Yeah, I was going to say I've definitely met many of your students and I work very closely with some of them. And I have to say you absolutely target and accomplish a lot of those because they're wonderful, wonderful people and very competent. And I have to say my history was different from Lucy's in that when I entered behavior analysis, there were no nearby programs that I could enroll in to get that strong training. So quality control for me in our field first begun with trying to assure that we have competent behavior analysts, create a strong program that was holistic and included assessment and interventions and really that scientific thinking that Lucy just spoke about, but also to have some control over the type of supervision experiences that our students got, because the first thing we were hearing was that there was this tremendous discrepancy between what we were teaching in the classroom and what people were being asked to do in the field. And I was very young. I thought I could take it all on at the time. So we decided to put forth a lot of ways to try to control that. But it was very, very fulfilling. We learned a lot about the nearby community partners, but it was absolutely very difficult to take on at the university.
Well, I was just thinking, because I know, and I actually taught adjunct when Pepperdine's program first started. I was teaching a couple of courses, and I remember each university kind of does it differently for those who are not familiar with it. So in some cases, like when I was at Pepperdine, we would actually have a class that was called a practica class where the students could get group supervision during that time. And then they were ideally working externally at an agency to accrue hours towards their BCBAs. And then in some cases, some universities don't have that training class or practica class at all. They just say, you guys figure it out externally, get your hours externally. And in some cases, they say you can work on campus and there's like an on-campus clinic. So kind of out of those three hybrids, is there anything else I'm missing, like just for people who are not familiar with how most universities are structured?
I think back in the day, we may have had some programs that required you to get all of your hours while you were enrolled with the university. But nowadays, with the move to 2,000 hours, I think that's becoming less frequent.
So I guess maybe the next question is like, when I think about universities who say you figure out your hours on your own, and then I think about programs like when I was at Pepperdine where we took a vested interest in getting students to get their hours during the years that they were getting their master's, like what are the pros and cons of both? And, why would a university choose to go one route versus the other?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. Well, I will say that Pepperdine has moved away from that model of offering group supervision because of the ethical concerns of we're not actually in the field supervising individuals. And also because of the BACB's requirements that an organization or anyone who's providing supervision to students has to meet the minimum supervision requirements. So we can't provide individual supervision to students. Therefore, we cannot offer them the group supervision portion of what we're offering. So we have moved away from that model, unfortunately. If we were in that position to be able to offer them all of their supervision, I think that would be ideal because we could make sure that we're connecting the academic piece to the application piece. Unfortunately, we don't have that luxury anymore. The limitation of that model, on the other hand, is that students are restricted to where they can work and the type of work that they can do and the hours that they need to put in to accomplish that, and the number of hours that they need to work while they're enrolled in a graduate program. So I think in allowing students the opportunity to work at their own fieldwork sites, while of course we have an application process for the agencies and for the supervisors, but beyond that, students are allowed to select their sites as long as they complete this process with us. There's a little bit less oversight, there's less control on the university side, but there's more flexibility for the student, right? And our requirement currently is for them to do their minimum requirements every month for what the BACB requires for them to be doing fieldwork. So in that context, I think that additional flexibility helps the students, but the limitation of that is that if they're not working enough hours, that could be a limitation, or if they're not getting the same quality of supervision because we have less oversight, that obviously hurts them.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question you put forth, Sarah, because when it comes to quality, universities have not really had a way to assess or report on the quality of their program, outside of assuring that they are embedding the task list items that the BACB, for example, requires, so we can assure that we have those in our syllabi. The rest of the responsibility has fallen upon us. More recently, Eric Dubuque and I did a review, and we really found that ABAI's accredited programs, now you have had to be around for at least 5 years, have historically had the data, and Susan just recently would have become eligible for that just because our master's program was newer to those. And I'm sure Pepperdine's becoming eligible soon to do that. But, you know, the difference there in that we could do in looking at quality was just exam pass rates. So really, as universities, all we have is the exam pass rates as a quality indicator for ourselves at this time, which we know is not the best quality indication at all. And gaining some understanding of what's happening when our students are placed out in the community, whether we have practical or not. I think the big issue that Lucy is mentioning here is putting our eyes and ears out there as our students are working with people, and the type of supervision we receive has been a challenge for all of us.
Well, and it sounds like the burden has really fallen on the organization. And that's why I thought this conversation was really important, because when you think about training, you know, anyone can pick up a book and read, anyone can sit in a classroom and like learn from a professor, but the hands-on practical experience that I know I received when I was in graduate school, all of us received when we were in graduate school, sounds like that model is really rare to find now. And so you're in this really unique situation where, you know, students are coming and learning the knowledge from the textbook, but then they're going elsewhere externally to a lot of the providers that we work with. So with all that in mind, I guess I'm excited to share, hopefully, if you're listening to this, you may have already seen this come out, but we recently announced that Pepperdine University Graduate School of Education and Psychology and BHCOE, along with your placement partners 2U, have formed a partnership to help expand and enhance the training for applied behavior analysis students. So I guess I'm really excited about it, but Lucy, do you want to share a little bit about what that means for your students?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are very excited about this partnership with BHCOE. And what it means for us is that we are going to be requiring our students to attend practica sites that have achieved BHCOE practica accreditation. And this is something that we'll be rolling out in the next couple of years. But ultimately, the idea is that we are going to be utilizing the strengths of BHCOE to have them come in and provide that level of oversight, provide that assessment of, is this agency providing the quality of clinical training that we would like to see within our field, right? As Ellie was mentioning, we're going to have these eyes and ears out in the field, making sure that these things are happening the way that they should be happening. And in addition, these clinical sites are going to benefit from having access to these resources that are going to help to strengthen their agency-wide practices, right? They're going to produce better practitioners, and those practitioners are going to be more likely to stay within those organizations due to the quality of training that they're receiving. So ultimately, it's going to strengthen our field in a lot of different ways. In addition, this partnership means for our students that if they come in already at a BHCOE site, I think, don't quote me on this, but if they come in already working at a BHCOE site, they will qualify for a scholarship to attend our program. And again, those details are in the works, but so we're very thrilled about this partnership.
I am actually really excited because we do have the scholarship details, and it is a significant scholarship. So, and it applies to 15 of the GSEP academic programs, which is great. And it applies on ground, hybrid, online, but it's 10% off of your tuition. If you work for an accredited site and you choose to pursue your master's degree, then you will get 10% off your tuition at Pepperdine, which is amazing. But I was actually going to say, the reason I'm excited about this partnership is because I don't know if y'all remember this, but maybe a couple years ago, this is pre Ellie joining BHCOE, Ellie, Lusineh, and Adele Najowski and we were sitting at a lunch, and we were talking about the pain points across universities where each of you were saying, like, and I think Lucy, you were at Cal State LA at the time. So all 3 universities were approving training sites independently. So all 3 universities that were within a 50-mile radius were sitting there and saying, we think Georgia's ABA company is great. They can accept our students. And that Georgia's ABA company, I don't know where I got that name from, they were going through and having to prove to Cal State LA, to Pepperdine, and to CSUN that they were appropriate to receive students. And so we saw this as kind of a big inefficiency. And I'm really excited about the fact that I think this will also reduce the burden on the providers who are trying to create these in-network partnerships with universities, because they're trying to get students and make sure that they're providing that training, but also it will reduce the burden on the universities who are really doing double work across a lot of these sites. And we're, as BHC, we're already out there, we're already doing those observations, we're already vetting these providers. So it really makes sense to kind of keep that back and forth and line of communication quite open with the university partners that we have.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Sarah. I think you bring up such an important point, and I'll give my personal example of a lot of times the agencies that are applying to become approved agencies with us will say, wow, you have this super long comprehensive process. It takes so long. You have so many questions, so many supplemental documents that you need to submit. And I can see how that's like unnecessary for them, because they're like, this person just happened to work here and happened to go to your program. And now we have to do all of this other legwork. So just so that they can accrue their supervision with us, or we have to worry about losing the staff member, right? Mm-hmm. So what you're describing is going to eliminate that, because they're only going to have to go through that process this one time, and it's going to apply for all of their students, hopefully.
Yeah, I agree.
Lucy, I have a secret for you. I'm responsible for a lot of the long process that you see, because Adele had reached out to me for our practical process, because we were one of the first universities that put one into place. And that long process you speak of has also been very laborious for us at the university. There's no additional pay for all of that review and all of that time that we put. The universities don't have a system of that level of comprehensive review to assure that your student is at a place where they're getting the type of supervision you need. So we as faculty had historically taken that on, among many other things, and it can really lead to some burnout on our part. And how often can we keep it up? And so I remember for sure the conversation we were having, Sarah, because Adele and I would constantly talk about the letters and what are some of the ways you respond to people if they're not quite there yet. And so she was constantly asking for all these templates that I was sending her way, saying, but neither of us should be doing this anymore. We shouldn't be doing this anymore.
Yeah. And I remember as you guys were complaining about that, I was like, we're evaluating these providers. We can just add some questions around training. But actually, Ellie, it's probably a nice segue. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the training site accreditation and kind of how it was created, and what are some of the sections there? And I know, obviously, if you're familiar with our accreditation process, there's the full accreditation, which is quite comprehensive. And then there's a training site accreditation that can get added on or be used as a standalone as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Before you start on that, can I just add that I also think this is really beneficial for our students, because from the students' perspective, they come into a program thinking their site is going to work. And then if we end up saying, no, this doesn't work, or no, we see these red flags, it puts them in a very precarious situation to be like, no, I really want to stay here because of my relationship with the company, or yes, I do need to leave this place. And now they have to find a new site, which delays when they can start their practicum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're 100% right. And then the other is, some literature we see in the literature that's been published about how should they seek out good ethical organizations. And I'm thinking, these poor students, how are they to know what to look for? They have not quite mastered the skills yet, and yet they're to go out there and figure it out. A lot of these conversations were the reasons that I actually originally joined BHCOE. I've always been interested in quality, but this was this incredible opportunity to help, really set some standards and move us forward in these areas. And I was really excited when Sara shared with me that this is an area she wants to continue to help with, because obviously we had felt it at the university. Our training site accreditation is developed very similarly to the way we do other accreditations. We take on, representatives. So we had providers who had been providing some good supervision for some time. We also had university faculty and coordinators who all served as subject matter experts and came together to tell us about what they expected to see as quality outcomes for their students. What did they expect to see in good supervision? We also collaborated with other organizations like ABAI because we knew that they were putting out some language around Practica. And I worked closely with Ashley Shater, who then put together some of this based on some of the things that she was also doing at the time at her university. And we put out and did some public comments and asked individuals what they thought about our standards, and really took the approach of we're starting this out. What are some organizations we can rely on? And we know APA has been doing this for some time for psychologists. And you're completely right, Lucy. It seems to me like that's a win-win. You know, the organizations get an individual invested in their own career. They want to be at an accredited site where they can get the most. And the universities now can trust that their placements mean something and they can get good experience. And the student can then be free of harm, you know, less probable that they will be in an organization that does not actually provide them with the type of supervision that they need. To me, it seems like a win-win-win-win-win. I hope I answered your question there, Sara.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't want to put you on the spot because you probably don't have this off the top of your head, but like, what are some of the things that we look for in the training site accreditation? And I'll caveat by saying there was a time where I would know every single standard, and I am well beyond knowing that off the top of my head. So I don't expect you to at all.
Well, that's because you also have that freakish memory that I can't seem to have at all, where you remember everything. I have to make contact with the written material at all times. But really what we're looking for, in addition to what we typically do in evaluation, which is the quality of therapy, the quality of onboarding, training, the type of outcome data that individuals have been collecting, what are they doing with patients, what is the type of responses patients give us when we ask them about the type of quality services that they're getting. All of those things we borrowed from what we understand in general evaluation, and kind of made this unique to training site by including the supervisors. So we ask questions of the supervisors about the type of experiences they get to provide, the type of support and resources they have. We also interview the trainees at the site so that we can learn of their experiences, and those who graduated as trainees, they have a lot to provide as direction about what the organization was like before they went out into the real world and started to actually practice. And the other things we look for are they adhering to what we understand as best practice as supervision? So we look to see, are they able to provide behavior skills training for some of the things that the individual needs to learn? Are they getting the experience to provide parent training? Are they getting the experience to train behavior technicians? And if they are, is someone watching them do that, providing them with feedback to do that? And so that's sort of the type of things we look for.
I love it. And I was just going to say too, I think especially because of how, I don't want to say vulnerable, because I don't think students are vulnerable, but I think like we have a high volume of these new career professionals coming into the space where, you know, you kind of mentioned turnover before, Anna, but like, I think about the fact that these people are impressionable. Maybe that's a better word than vulnerable. They're impressionable. And it's really important that they get that first experience right. And that their voice is also heard. And sometimes I feel like their voice is dismissed a little bit because, you know, who are they to share what their experiences? They don't know what good training looks like. But I think it goes back to the social validity piece. Just like I think as a field, we had to move towards the idea of listening to patients and saying, we may be doing everything perfectly, but patients don't feel that way. Well, same thing with students. We may be doing everything perfectly, but we need to make sure that students feel that their best interest is in mind, that they're getting the training that they want. So I'm just excited about that, especially considering it's the biggest workforce in our field. I don't feel like we listen to their voice enough.
Oh, 100%. And then, of course, we're all behavior analysts. We know that, you know, no one intends to be a bad supervisor. I don't know any organization who's like, I'm going to take on these young students and do a crappy job putting them out. At least I don't think anyone comes in ever thinking that way. But the contingencies set it up such that people do get overwhelmed, overbusy. They might get much more engaged with administrative work rather than to have the time for some of the clinical oversight or to provide feedback on professional conduct. So having a structure, having very clear guidelines about what's best practice and standards to follow, but also having us as outsiders as a source to provide that feedback, I think adds the contingency that's missing. Otherwise, we know what's going to happen in any environment. You put a good person, an excellent person in a bad environment, that's what you're going to get out of them.
Absolutely. And I mean, if I can just add to that, I think what we're really talking about here is demand on agencies. BCBAs don't all sign up to be fieldwork supervisors, and yet they're assigned this role, whether or not they feel confident in doing that task or not.
Wow, that resonates with me so much. And it's what I say. And to Ellie's point, we all have our reasons of why we joined BHCOE. And I joined BHCOE because I have spent the last decade really advocating for access to care, through insurance and Medicaid, and, helping TRICARE families. And one thing that I began to realize over the past few years was that all ABA doesn't look the same. And the critical piece that quality plays in ensuring this benefit can continue. And I think that is not something that I take lightly at all, and why I came really to be a part of this incredible team here. And so I'm just thinking, Lucy, in your perspective, I'm thinking we're talking a lot about California, and just what you guys are doing there. That's so incredible. But for all our listeners across the United States, how can they, how can this translate maybe to help other universities? Or what would you say to those who, are maybe considering becoming a training site, that could really help them understand what are the next steps to do this, and how you feel about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the first thing that an agency needs to establish is, am I capable of allocating resources for clinical training of people who are going to go on to become BCBAs? If an organization is brand new and they're just working on building up their caseload, they have maybe 1 or 2 BCBAs who have 15 to 20 cases each, they probably don't have the bandwidth to also provide clinical supervision. Right. So we need to first identify, are you someone who actually wants to be doing this, or are you doing it because you think you have to be doing it? And once we identify that, then it's about, how can you ensure that you're doing a good job for our field? And that's where BHCOE comes in, right? Like, why not seek external support from an organization that wants to come in and give you the resources and tools to allow you to be successful? Why not allow this organization to come in and do that initial assessment of giving you the thumbs up of, yes, you're doing things the way that is going to represent our field in the right way, right? So I think it's like, organizations have to have that willingness to embrace change, and a willingness to be assessed and to want to improve themselves.
I love that. Great. That's great. Such a good point, right? The willingness to embrace change, right? I think is a valuable piece in this, because it's easy to get stuck, right? Doing the same thing. And, kind of what I was mentioning earlier, the other reason I'm so excited about this is because training seems to be a primary pain point in our industry, staff feeling a lack of training. So this is just so exciting, because it really resolves and brings some, answers, to that, and some support. I'm so excited about what you guys are doing.
Yeah, and I will also add that there are agencies out there that are doing fantastic work, and why not have that work be recognized, right? So yes, you're doing great, but it's not just about you, right? Accept the recognition, that's fantastic for you, and set the bar for other agencies to follow in your footsteps.
Yeah, it really is. I'm getting so excited just listening, like these but so many universities they might be worried about ABA organizations not being happy with this type of requirement. Do you have any advice for them?
I think it ultimately goes back to being open to embracing change. It is not easy. It requires a lot of additional planning for universities, for students, and for organizations. It may be an additional thing that they have to allocate time to when they already have very limited time in their schedule. But I think, at least on our level, hopefully this rollout will happen in a way that will give agencies appropriate time to get to that point. And also, I just think that it's one of the things that it's like going to the dentist. Nobody likes it, but you got to do it. Right.
I hate the dentist. So yeah, like literally that's my least favorite thing to do. So great example.
That's better than another analogy I've heard accreditation
Oh,
referred
no,
to in the
no,
past
no,
week.
no, don't go there.
Oh
Do
my
not go
God.
there. Do
Well,
not.
now you have to say
No,
it,
no,
but you
no.
have to say it. But that was Jonathan Mueller's comment. And I was like,
No.
holy cow.
Yeah. And at the investor summit, he gave a presentation and he called accreditation a proctology exam. I think, no, he called it a colonoscopy. That's what it was.
Colonoscopy, a
Yes,
colonoscopy.
yes,
I was
yes.
like, I've never heard it referred to.
I know.
I
wow.
like dentists better.
I do too. I have to say, from my perspective, and Lucy, correct me if you don't feel that this is true at all. I felt that the organizations around us were actually super excited at the time when we set standards. And some of that is because they were historically used to maybe being the providers that are doing an excellent job providing good services, but quality was not as noticed as if they knew university faculty members, had relationships with certain individuals, or potentially even graduated from the program, because universities did not have a third-party objective system to be able to go to. My experience when I entered the field, and the reason I immediately moved to setting some standards, was that I felt that there would not be equal opportunity for all organizations to recruit new students that are coming into the field. Instead, people were trying to take me out to lunch. They were trying to figure out ways to kind of get themselves known. And I worried very much about that because that wouldn't tell me about quality necessarily. I don't know how you feel about that, but I feel like this provides that equal opportunity to actually say my quality is good. I do this.
Ellie, go ahead. I was just going to say, that's such a good point because I have heard providers complain to me saying, we provide great supervision, but there's someone who's just very business savvy and is able to connect with someone at the administrative level at a university and gets like a first right of refusal relationship on students. And it's like the fact that students are turning into like a marketplace, I think is just what we want to avoid. So that's such a good point. But Lucy, go ahead.
Oh, absolutely. I agree. I mean, that's exactly what my experience was. I didn't know the first thing about applying to ABA agencies when I was in my graduate program, right? Like I was looking to my professors to give me recommendations. Everything happened through word of mouth. And even nowadays, I think that trend continues. And just because like I've had really terrible experiences at some of the places I've been referred to, and word of mouth is something like you trust this person to give you a good recommendation, but nobody knows the quality of your experience, because I think within organizations, you can fall under a really great BCBA who's going to give you excellent supervision, and you can fall under a really terrible BCBA. And if the organization hasn't accounted for the quality across the board, then it really just is like the luck of the draw of who you end up being paired with. And that's, I think, what accreditation is going to help to fix, is ensuring that across the board within an organization, you have equal performance, equal opportunities. And then that's also going to allow those equal opportunities for organizations who are looking for students who are in graduate programs.
So it's a good segue just talking about accreditation. And I wanted to just talk about the BACB's recent newsletter in which they announced that universities have 10 years, which is a long timeline, but a timeline nonetheless, to obtain ABAI accreditation as a prerequisite to provide approved hours for certificates. So I wanted to just know what you thought about this decision and, how does that affect your program? How do you think that's affecting universities in general? And how do you think it will impact quality?
I'm very rigid in this way, and I love it. So I'll put that out there. Personally, I think it's fantastic. I think we should have done this a long time ago. I think it's going to help to improve the quality of our university-based training that we're offering. It's going to help standardize things that currently are not standardized, and hold everybody who earns this degree to the same, to that standardization. I'm just repeating myself, but my point is that, I think it's a very valuable thing that we're doing. I know that it will impact some universities more than other universities and some programs more than others, but I think that's a good thing, because those universities that it impacts more, it should be a wake-up call for them for, are you actually engaging in the best practices that are going to move our field forward, or I'm not naming any names, or are you a degree mill? We don't want degree mills in behavior analysis. What we do is so nuanced. We really need people to get what they're doing, or else we're gonna, again, find ourselves in the situations that we are currently finding ourselves in.
I just want to caveat, just because I want to make sure we don't get in trouble. These are just opinions here about, what we all think. But I do think there's a movement in our society about the commoditization of education, right? When you think about like the technical schools, the online programs, and some of the kind of, I don't want to say like fast food type approaches to education. But I think one thing I will say is that the good news is that education is innovating, which I think education is one of the slowest innovators I've found across industries. And so I love the idea that education is shifting their model of how people get educated. But I do agree that I think we need to continue evolving and continue pushing the envelope to make sure the outcomes are there and the successes are there of the students who obtain those educational degrees from these unique programs that may not be the traditional method.
I definitely agree with what you're saying. And I do want to add that I think every program should have the opportunity to improve their practices to this degree. And I also want to highlight that on the other hand, I see that this is going to create barriers to access for members from diverse cultural backgrounds who may not have access to traditional education. So like you're saying, yes, we have these unique educational innovative practices that are happening, but if a program doesn't evolve and doesn't adopt those practices and doesn't take into consideration these standards, I see there being a larger impact on individuals from marginalized backgrounds with moving to accreditation, because it's going to make them attending these programs potentially more difficult, and it's going to make them graduating from these programs potentially more difficult. So I think while I love this idea in theory of, yes, we do need to move towards standardization and towards ABAI accreditation for our university programs, we do need to factor in what can we do to make that process accessible for all members of our community.
Yeah, I was just thinking about like the single mom or like the person who's making a career change mid-career, during the midlife, who don't have the luxury of attending like a 9-to-5 program, where they don't have to work. So, but sorry, Anna, I think you were going to say something.
No, I think it's just the idea of continually innovating, right? Because I think about, the human life component of a child with autism. I myself, I have a child with autism. So when I think about that piece of this, for me as a parent, absolutely, it makes total sense. I want the field to continue to improve and evolve and ensure that whoever is going out to see our kids that have autism have the best training to help our kids have the best outcomes. I think about in medicine, how that has evolved over time with other fields. New technology comes out. You've got to learn how to use new equipment. I think about just surgeons in general and all the new things that from a technology standpoint, right? And so for me, behavioral health shouldn't look any different, right? I mean, we should be focused on accessibility without giving up quality, right? No one's going to go to a heart surgeon that's like, oh, I went to the school that only makes you go for like 5 years and you don't even have to go in person, and I'm going to do your heart surgery, right? I would be like, that's okay. So I think raising the standards and thinking about, to Sara, to your point, like how it impacts the patient is important.
I think if we were to just also notice some of the numbers in our field, it's very, very much telling. More than 50% of BCBAs have graduated within the last 3 years. And so we're definitely dealing with an influx, coming a wave of many individuals who are just graduating from these programs. And in the paper that Eric and I did, we found, and this is where I know, Sara, your memory is so much better than mine, but we found that the majority of the students, something like again, 50% or so came from like 2 schools that were actually not putting out the best exam pass rates. So it kind of really is concerning to know that, we need some quality control over the universities. And if we have such an influx, such a need, we get so many students coming out, that we have some quality control over it. So I'm totally with Lucy on this. When I developed the program at Cal State Northridge, we begun with thinking that we're going to become accredited. So we designed a coursework and everything else to be prepared for that process. And we've been collecting self-assessment data for that reason. I think standardization is excellent. And we certainly see a difference between those organizations, those schools that have that standardization and have, a third party looking at them. I'm about accreditation because it provides that oversight. So it's hard for me then to say I'm really all about quality control and accreditation, but hey, as a university faculty, I don't want this because it's going to be pain and suffering.
Yeah. So, I think we covered a lot today, but I guess maybe I'll just pose like a final question here, which is, do you have any advice for university department chairs or professors who are worried about the state of the field and, who are trying to tackle this issue of quality? And I'll caveat by saying, I think what I realized at BHCOE is no matter how much we were trying to stop the bleed of the quality issue at the provider level, we realized we couldn't do it without universities. And so I think I remember one time posting about something like that on LinkedIn, and a couple of professors reached out to me being like, what are you talking about? Like, we're doing our part. And I think the idea of collaboration of the university and the provider was like a newer concept. And so that would be kind of my 2 cents to the answer is like, are the providers and the universities collaborating on what does the university want out of the providers they're partnering with to make sure their students have a stellar experience? And I feel like that's the gap that I hope this partnership will fill. But I'm curious, what advice you might give Lucy or Ellie.
I think what I would tell or what I would want to impart to universities, well, first of all, I also wanted to say that Pepperdine's program is not yet accredited. We've just started the process of working towards that. So my perspectives on accreditation for universities is coming from a place of like, this is something I want to do for our own program. So,
and you guys are only 5 years old, I think, right? So you don't think you were eligible.
Yeah. So we're a little over maybe 5, maybe 6 years. I think we started in 2016. So so that's one thing, right? And then but what I would offer to universities is that before I say what I would offer to universities, I also want to say that we are all just people in a system and working within that system, right? So depending on which school system you work in, whether it's a private university or a public university, you're dealing with bureaucracy that's going to potentially prevent you from doing the things that you consider ideal for your program. But it is up to us to advocate for our field, right? Because we are such a small field and we are in such high demand. So if we don't we have to make our voices heard. We have to set that standard for our universities to tell them what is expected from us. And I think what accreditation does is that it gives us the foundation to stand on, because when a university goes to their administrator, or when a program goes to the administration and asks to make these changes, a lot of times they're like, why would we make these changes? Like, things are going just fine the way they are, and you're talking about taking time away and taking more release units to do these things that, the program's fine the way that it is. But when you come in with this requirement for accreditation, now you have that leg to stand on, where you tell your administration, no, these are the requirements that we must meet if we want to continue to operate. And I think that universities or faculty members within universities really need to look to this as an advantage to help us be able to advocate for moving our field forward.
That was brilliant. I'm not sure if I can add anything to that, because she's just 100% right on.
Was great. Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Lucy, for joining us. And thank you, Ellie, for taking time out to join us as well. It was a great conversation, and we can't wait to maybe give a recap of some of the follow-up from the partnership in a couple of months here. And I know Pepperdine was the first to kind of dive in, and we have a couple other universities who have also agreed to kind of take on this path as well. So we can't wait to share more with all of you as those announcements come out. So thank you all so much, and have a great rest of your day.
That's it for today's episode of The Skinner Report. By allowing yourself to be inspired and educated through this podcast, you are now one step closer to growing building, or starting your own ABA practice that can impact the behavioral landscape. Continue nourishing your heart and mind right here by listening to more of our episodes at bhcoe.org. Be sure to subscribe to the show and leave a positive rating. Let us make the ABA scene safer, more caring, and more connected than ever before. Thank you for joining us. See you on the next one.